You are watching Channel Y. Channel Y, a South Asian Canadian channel.
आज हम बात करने वाले हैं लीड फिल्म मेकर सत्यजीत रे के बारे में। अगर कहा जाए सिंपल वर्ड्स में तो सत्यजीत रे ने बहुत पहले ही इंडियन सिनेमा को वर्ल्ड मैप पे एस्टैब्लिश कर दिया था। आज बहुत सारे बॉलीवुड के सेलिब्रिटीज हॉलीवुड में जा रहे हैं, इंडिया को वर्ल्ड लेवल पर पहुंचा रहे हैं, ग्लोबल डोमिनेशन की बातें हो रही हैं, लेकिन सत्यजीत रे ने बहुत पहले ही अपनी फिल्मों के थ्रू ऐसा कर दिया था। और आज सत्यजीत रे जी के बारे में हम बात करेंगे, उनकी फिल्मों के बारे में बात करेंगे और हमारे साथ स्पेशल गेस्ट भी शो पे मौजूद है, मीनाक्षी जी। ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ वाई मीडिया ग्रुप, आई वुड लाइक टू वेलकम यू टू चैनल वाई।
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to talk to you and to talk to Y. Thank you.
It is our pleasure, Meenakshi, to have you on our show. And Meenakshi, of course, you have curated these films of Satyajit Ray, and the films will be showcased at Toronto International Film Festival, which is an honor for every Indian, if I say so, right?
Yeah.
So Satyajit Ray ji को सब जानते हैं, especially film enthusiasts अगर उनसे बात करें या जो फिल्मों को पढ़ते हैं। मैंने भी फिल्म स्टडीज करी है, टोरंटो में मैंने यहाँ पे फिल्म का कोर्स किया था, एंड आई वाज सो हैप्पी जब मुझे टोरंटो फिल्म स्कूल में हम इंटरनेशनल फिल्म्स की बातें कर रहे थे और एक स्पेशल सब्जेक्ट जो था वो सत्यजीत रे की फिल्मों के लिए था, तो वी हैड टू स्टडी दोज फिल्म्स। और बहुत अच्छा लगता है, इंटरनेशनल फिल्म मेकर्स हमारे कॉलेज में आते थे एंड दे यूज्ड टू टॉक अबाउट सत्यजीत रे एंड हिज क्राफ्ट। तो मेरा आपसे सबसे पहला सवाल ये होगा कि आपने कब अपने आप को इंट्रोड्यूस किया सत्यजीत रे जी की फिल्मों से?
Oh, so I'm Meenakshi Shedde. So I'm basically a film critic and a programmer. और मैं जब actually जब मैं कॉलेज में थी तो मैं अमृत गांगर हैं जो मैं गुरु मानती हूँ, जिसने जो एक फिल्म क्यूरेटर है, फिल्म स्कॉलर है। और जब मैं बहुत यंग थी, कॉलेज में थी, तब वो एक स्क्रीन यूनिट, एक फिल्म सोसाइटी शुरू की थी। एंड वहां मैंने, दैट वाज माय फिल्म स्कूल एक्चुअली, जो बहुत सारा जो आई स्टिल नो टुडे अबाउट फिल्म रियली स्टार्टेड देयर, माय जर्नी स्टार्टेड देयर। सो इन दोज डेज यूज्ड टू शो 35 mm प्रिंट्स। सो पुराने जमाने में 35 mm प्रिंट्स आते थे सेल्यूलॉइड रील पे, जो एक बड़ा सा भारी कैन 7 या 8 किलो का डब्बा में फिल्म प्रिंट्स एक जगह से दूसरी जगह तक लेके जाते थे, फिल्म प्रोजेक्टर मशीन में डाल के एक रील चेंज करके दूसरी रील वगैरह वगैरह। सो इट वेरी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड process, but he did it with a lot of love. And cyclo style notes बनाते थे, क्योंकि उस जमाने में phones नहीं थे, computers नहीं थे, internet नहीं था, so very old style. So he used to cyclo style notes, sharing greats of the greats of world cinema, interviews with them. So I learned to be a film critic and a film programmer through learning about these. And there was also Maithili Rao and Jilani Saab, FG Jilani, whose pen name was Iqbal Masood. These two people were great film critics. Maithili still is an active film critic. So I learned a lot about what makes for great cinema through them. And through them, I was introduced to the works of world cinema, including Satyajit Ray. Satyajit Ray, Bengali pronunciation hai unka. So that's when I first got to know that there was this great filmmaker. And so I'm very honored. So this is the 4th time I'm working for TIFF. ये चौथी बारी है जो मैं TIFF सिनेमा टेक के साथ काम कर रही हूँ। बाकी 3-4 दफा पहले काम कर रही हूँ 10 साल से उनके साथ। और कैमरॉन बेली जो TIFF के CEO हैं, उन्होंने मुझे इनवाइट किया ये प्रोग्राम को क्यूरेट करने के लिए। इसका मतलब है प्रोग्रामिंग, इसका मतलब है कि so basically because Satyajit Ray की सेंटेनरी है, 100 साल हुआ उनका जीवन के birth centenary, so it's delayed by a year because of the pandemic. So we wanted to show some of his finest work, but उनके 37 films उन्होंने बनाए हैं, तो which ones to choose, that was already a very difficult task. But also we wanted to celebrate Ray, but we also wanted to open up the canon. उनके साथ जो बाकी के filmmakers है वो भी बहुत ही distinguished थे. So we also wanted other works by his contemporaries, as well as I was very, very keen that we talk to the younger generation. It's very important because I think बहुत सारे, in general, the younger generation, उन्होंने नाम सुना है Satyajit Ray, लेकिन उन्होंने a lot of the youngsters who are in their 20s, उन्होंने कभी भी एक फिल्म नहीं देखी उनकी। हाँ, YouTube में होगा, लेकिन इधर उधर होगा, लेकिन they have not actually seen his work. So yesterday was, मुझे बहुत ही खुशी हुई कि we opened last night with Charulata, which was Ray's personal favorite of his work. And it was very difficult, but we managed to get a 35 restored copy from the Academy Film Archives, so Oscar wale. So it's very ironic that some of the great films of India, we are preserved in India, but also in the West, they have very, very good restoration, etc. And also our National Archives also have, but sometimes they're not always available, or they're not always available with English subtitles, वगैरह. So there are many, many things to consider while you program. आपने सपने में हो कि मुझे ये फिल्म्स बतानी है, that is one dream list. जैसे मैं पिक्चर बनानी हूँ, मैं बना रही हूँ, मुझे शाहरुख खान चाहिए, मुझे ये सिनेमाटोग्राफर चाहिए, वो एडिटर चाहिए. So आपके सपने में एक चीज होते हैं, जो एक्चुअली रियलिटी में बनता है वो काफी अलग हो सकता है. So also programming or curating, your dream list of films may be one list, but जो actually हम ला सकते हैं, for which we do get permissions and which we want to show, वो काफी अलग हो सकता है. So for example, we were very keen working with TIFF to get 35 prints. So one is to किसके साथ prints है, कौन सी archive में है, वो कौन सी condition में है, उसमें subtitles है क्या. So we were very thrilled to get this beautifully restored 35 print from the archives. Also a second film other than Charulata, we also have Chatranj Khiladi, which is one of the very rare films उन्होंने हिंदी में बनाई है, जो बाकी का most of his work बांग्ला में है, बंगाली में है. But Chatranj Khiladi is an adaptation of a Mon-Fri Premchand novel. And it's very rich. It's very different from his earlier work because it's a very rich period historical film, very grand. And, Maharaja ke baare mein, it's about the British overthrow of the last Nawab Wajid Ali Shah of Awadh, right, in 1856. So in the 19th century, so very royal, and there are scenes with horses and elephants and, very grand, lavish film. But the others are much more modest, of course. So we've shown, we opened with Charulata. We also have Devi. We have Nayak, which is a very exquisite film with Uttam Kumar, a very famous top Bengali star who reigned for decades, and Sharmila Tagore. So actually Ray had discovered Sharmila Tagore as almost like a child actress in his Teen Konna, which is Three Daughters, one of his very early films. But by then, by the time he made Nayak with her, she had already gone to Bombay and become a very big star with Kashmir Ki Kali, or this Shakti Samanta film with Shami Kapoor and Anupama and a whole lot of other films, worked with Yash Chopra. So she had become a very big Bollywood star by then. So Nayak jab unhone banaya, it was kind of Ray's way of becoming a little more commercial, because people said, "Ha, aap art house picture banate hain, kaun dekhega, वगैरह वगैरह." They thought it's too hi-fi for them. So this was his way of trying to become more commercial, but still it's a very independent art house film, but it has stars to make it a little more commercially appealing. So it has both Uttam Kumar and Sharmila Tagore, who's in a wonderful role. So there are these three we have 4 films by Ray. Then we have 4 films by his contemporaries. So we have Shubharna Rekha by Ritik Ghatak, which is a great partition masterpiece. Then we have Manikal's Siddheshwari, which is a very, very, very astonishingly avant-garde experimental documentary on this great Hindustani classical singer and Thumri singer, Siddheshwari. Then we have Aparna Sen's Mr. and Mrs. Iyer, a very beautiful film, which is addressing communalism through a very tender love story with the lovely, lovely, lovely Konkona Sen Sharma or Rahul Bose hai usme. And we have a very beautiful, very unusual film, Jago Hua Savera, which is a film by A.J. Kardar, who was then in West Pakistan in 1959, making this film in occupied East Pakistan, which later became in 1971 Bangladesh, and a collaboration between West Pakistan, East Pakistan, and India. So it had A.J. Kardar from West Pakistan, it had Faiz Ahmad Faiz writing the lyrics and the screenplay, which is very unusual for him. And then from Bangladesh, we have Khan Ataur Rahman, who's a very great Bangladeshi star. Then we have Zahir Rehan, who was assistant director, who became a very accomplished filmmaker. From India, we have Tripti Mitra, who's a wonderful actress from IPTA, which was the artistic theatrical wing of the Communist Party of India. Very active, it had very fine theatrical productions. We have Timir Baran, a great music composer. We have Manik Bandyopadhyay, who wrote Padda Nadir Majhi, Boatman of the River Padma, on which it's based. So it was a Pakistan, Bangladesh, India co-production, which is unthinkable today. इस ज़माने में हम सोच भी नहीं सकते हैं कि artists can go beyond borders, beyond political petty wars and nationalist crap and narrow-minded views and create a great work of art. And it also had British collaboration. So it was very all pan South Asia, but it also had international collaboration because it had British cinematographer, editor, sound editor, sound recordist were all from England. So it is very, very unusual film which we have. Then we also have two films by younger filmmakers. One is Amit Datta, who's made this exquisite film called Nansuk, very beautiful, on an 18th century painter from Guler, which is a small principality in Himachal Pradesh in the foothills of the Himalayas. And we have Onik Datta's Aparajito, which means the undefeated, which is a film of this year, 2022. But it was on how Satyajit Ray made his first film, Pather Panchali, Song of the Little Road. But it's really also, it's about how he struggled to make his film, but it's also about, it's made in black and white, very lovingly, almost with a silver nitrate feel. It's very classically made, like how Satyajit Ray made his first film. Yeah. So it's also trying to look like that. It's aesthetics, etc. So it's a very interesting mix, a very classical Ray, also it's contemporaries, also younger generation case. So different things for different people. So it's a kind of holistic package. इस तरह का कुछ ऐसे idea था.
मतलब ये तो सुनकर ही इतना अच्छा लग रहा है, तो कोर्स देखने में तो बहुत ही मजा आने वाला है, स्पेशली अगर आप एक फिल्म एंथुसियास्ट हैं, आपको फिल्मों का शौक है, तो आई थिंक बहुत ही एक्साइटिंग लाइनअप है ये तो मीनाक्षी जी, मैं बात करूंगी फिर से हम, क्योंकि सत्यजीत रे जी के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, इज अ लेजेंडरी फिल्म मेकर। तो जैसे कि मैंने शो की शुरुआत में बोला था कि वर्ल्ड लेवल पे, वर्ल्ड मैप पे इंडियन सिनेमा को ले जाने में सत्यजीत रे जी का बहुत ज्यादा बड़ा कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन है अगर हम कहें तो। लेकिन क्योंकि आपने इतना काम किया उनकी सारी फिल्मों का लाइनअप करने में, तो अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं कि आपके अकॉर्डिंग वो क्या स्पेशल इफेक्ट था या क्या स्पेशल स्किल थी जो रे जी में थी, जो वो अपनी फिल्मों में डालते थे?
So I think he had a very unusual background, क्योंकि quite a difficult background. तो जब वो करीबन 2 साल के थे, छोटा बच्चा था, तभी उनके पापा सुकुमार रे गुजर गए. तो he was brought up by a single mother, so it was very difficult, and they were living with other relatives वगैरह, joint family जैसा था, but they were very culturally evolved. तो वो हिंदू थे, लेकिन they belong to a sect called ब्रह्मो, जो very modern थे, cosmopolitan थे, social reformist थे. तो वो जो इंडियन रिलीजियस ट्रेडिशंस थे उनको क्वेश्चन कर रहे थे. तो ये इन्फ्लुएंस आप उनके फिल्म में देख सकते हो, जैसे चारुलता. सो ही वाज वेरी मॉडर्न, ही वाज वेरी फेमिनिस्ट, ही वाज वेरी ह्यूमनिस्ट. और जो स्टैंडर्ड बॉलीवुड फिल्म या बाकी के, इट वाजंट कॉल्ड बॉलीवुड फिल्म इन दोस डेज, हिंदी सिनेमा बोलते थे, बॉलीवुड वाज, इट वाज दैट टर्म केम इन मच लेटर. बट जनरली जो मेन स्ट्रीम सिनेमा थी ऑल इंडिया पे, हिंदी सिनेमा में, बट ऑल्सो बाकी के भाषा जो थे, was generally very modern, quite conservative, quite regressive, some romance, action, some 6 गाने, happy ending kind of template जो था. But not only did he break away from that, कि उन्होंने बहुत रियलिस्टिक फिल्म्स बनाए जो अपनी खुद की जिंदगी में बारे, जो आप ऑर्डिनरी पीपल के जिंदगी के बारे में फिल्म बनाए, और जो नॉन एक्टर्स कास्ट किया. ऑफ कोर्स ही कास्ट मेनी फाइन अकम्प्लिश्ड एक्टर्स आल्सो, बट जैसे उनकी फर्स्ट फिल्म पथेर पांचाली, इट्स अबाउट अ ब्रदर एंड सिस्टर, 2 young kids growing up in the rural countryside. वो काफी गरीब हैं, लेकिन उनकी गरीबी से सिर्फ गरीबी नहीं दिखती है, उनकी डिग्निटी दिखती है. आई डोंट नो व्हाट इज डिग्निटी इन हिंदी. यू सी देयर सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट, उनका खुद के सम्मान दिखता है, उनकी बहुत सारी खुशियां, ढेर सारी खुशियां दिखती हैं. तो ऐसे नहीं कि गरीब है तो कुछ भी नहीं है. एक्चुअली उल्टा, इनफैक्ट दैट फिल्म वाज अक्यूज्ड ऑफ selling, exporting poverty to the West. In fact, I thought it sold the opposite. It showed how you can be poor and still lead a life of great dignity and great joy as well, even though you don't have much money in the bank, right? So खुशियां सिर्फ पैसे से नहीं आता है. So actually, I think it showed the reverse. And I think the reason he's relevant today is because of his modernity. जो values वो बताते, उनकी aesthetics तो very classy. So he was exposed to a lot of films from all over the world cinema. Actually, he was one of the first who started a film society in India. Satyajit Ray, उनके करीब के दोस्त से चिदानंद दासगुप्ता, who was actually Aparna Sen's father, and many छोटा सा उनका ग्रुप था जो उन्होंने, who started one of the first film societies of India, okay, around the 1950s. So this is all early days after independence. So they looked at, उन्होंने कहाँ से ढूंढ कर Russian consulate से, Swedish consulate से, इधर उधर सब लिख के they would get films, they would show it in an informal club. Russian films, Swedish films, Norwegian films, American films. So he is exposed to very wide range of Indian cinema, not only Bollywood or Hindi films, or जो या बांग्ला फिल्म्स जो थिएटर में बताते थे, that was a very small part of it. And actually he was थोड़ा सा snooty भी था वो. He was a little bit because they were very culturally involved. He has very rich exposure to world literature, rich exposure to world music. So he was very accomplished in Western classical music, Hindustani classical music. तो वो थोड़ा सा snooty थे, मुझे लगता है, जरा सा elite, जरा सा hi-fi. और actually जो जब उन्होंने फर्स्ट फिल्म बनाई वो पॉकेट पंचाली, तो हिज फ्रेंड्स वर शॉक्ड कि ये इतना पॉपुलर नॉवेल है, आपने पढ़ा भी नहीं. तो जब उन्होंने पढ़ा, ही वाज वेरी मूव्ड, ही थॉट वाओ दिस इज अ वंडरफुल स्टोरी. और तभी उनको लेटर उनको आइडिया मिला कि हम इसको फिल्म भी बना सकते हैं. तो उनके सब दोस्त जो थे वो एक्चुअली एड एजेंसी, एडवर्टाइजिंग एजेंसी में काम करते थे. एंड उनके बॉस, आई थिंक इट वाज हिज बॉस. So he always, this is very special about Ray. तो उनकी फैमिली इतनी कल्चरली इवॉल्व थे. उनके ग्रैंडफादर उपेंद्र किशोर, या उन्होंने एक चिल्ड्रंस मैगजीन शुरू किया था, संदेश. तो they also thought that children also should be encouraged exposed to world literature, world music, world, comics, etc. in a very fun way. मस्ती भरा तरीके से उनको भी encourage करना है कि वो literature वगैरह पढ़े. तो his father had also continued it, but बीच में बंद हुआ था. And Ray reopened that magazine. So he restarted the editing of that magazine. So for somebody to be so accomplished, और फिर भी इतने busy थे, इतने फिल्म बनाए हैं, वो राइटर थे, डायरेक्टर थे, प्रोड्यूसर थे, म्यूजिक कंपोजर थे, इलस्ट्रेटर थे, स्टोरी बोर्ड बनाते थे, माने हम लाइक अ वन मैन आर्मी. और हर एक चीज बहुत ही क्लासी तरीके, नहीं हम ये भी करेंगे वो भी, ऐसे नहीं कि सब मसाला गोची फोची किया. हर एक बारीक डिसिप्लिन में ही वाज लाइक वर्ल्ड क्लास, राइट. बहुत एक्सपीरियंस, बहुत वेरी अकम्प्लिश्ड. फिर भी उन्होंने फुर्सत निकाल के बच्चों का मैगजीन संदेश को एडिट किया, लिखा, illustrations की, माने इतने दिल से, like what, you're not going to make money from a children's magazine, but that was his class, right? You can be a world cinema maker, लेकिन बच्चों के लिए वो खास टाइम निकाल के वेरी क्लासी मैगजीन, उनको भी मजा आना चाहिए इस तरह के. So that beautiful sentiment I also appreciate.
Yeah. और जैसे कि आपने कहा कि सत्यजीत रे की जो फिल्में थी उसमें बहुत ही सिंपल डेली लाइफ की जो स्टोरीज थी, ऐसा नहीं है कि बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स स्टोरी लाइन है, बहुत ही सिंपल तरीके से वो अपनी स्टोरी लाइंस करते थे. और डे टू डे मैन एंड वुमेन रिलेशनशिप, बहुत ही सिंपल चीजें. तो मुझे भी, अगर मैं इफ आई हैव टू से, मुझे भी उनकी फिल्मों के बारे में ये बहुत अच्छी बात लगती है कि बहुत ही सिंपल फिल्में जो आम दिन की हमारी कहानियां होती हैं वैसे वो करते थे. और मुझे ये भी लगता है मीनाक्षी जी की उनकी फिल्मों की अगर हम आज बात करें, आप रेलेवेंस की बात करें कि मॉडर्न डे में भी उनकी फिल्में रेलेवेंट है, आई थिंक द रीजन इज दिस कि उस टाइम पर भी उनके कॉन्सेप्ट और स्टोरी लाइन काफी बोल्ड होती थी. और आज जब हम फिल्में बनाते हैं, आज बॉलीवुड में जिस तरीके की फिल्में बन रही हैं, बहुत सारे बार जब फिल्म मेकर्स बात करने की कोशिश करते हैं ऐसे टॉपिक्स की जो आज रेलेवेंट है, चाहे वो मैन एंड वुमेन रिलेशनशिप हो या फिर सेक्सुअल अब्यूज हो, तो आज बहुत सारे लोग, certain section of society offend हो जाते हैं, तो वो फिल्में बन नहीं जाती.
You're very right. So he had simple storylines in some of his films, but I think he was very sophisticated. So I don't think his films were simplistic. And actually, you're very right. I think he was very, very, very modern. वो उनके ज़माने के बहुत ही आगे थे. He was ahead of his times. So he was talking very feminist ideas in 1955. For example, जो फिल्म हमने opening फिल्म थी हमारी चारुलता, जो कल रात को बताई थी. So I was mentioning, so it's a very rare 35mm restored print from the Academy Film Archive, the Oscar wale. So we have two films from there. This one, Charulata, as well as Chatranj Khiladi. But what I wanted to say about Charulata is, in 1955, or right in the early 60s, he was talking about a woman who jo shadishuda hai, but she wants to be a great writer, and she has an affair with her husband's cousin, right? She has a crush on him. So he's talking of a married woman's ambitions as an artist, as well as her romantic desires, her desires as an artist, as well as so nobody really gave importance to a woman's dreams or desires at that point, right? We were busy, and usually in Hindi cinema, she was just somebody that, somebody that the hero was in love with, but he was busy doing his other action and romance and adventure. She was just a very small tail wagging part of it, if I would say so. So she was not actively involved in the story. She was just a kind of sidekick, pretty sidekick for him. The whole movie was about the hero, and she was just a pretty sidekick. So you could have two stories in, two songs shot in Switzerland, and some, she'll be in some patla chiffon shar, and he's wearing solid warm gumboots, warm overcoat, and she's some patla chiffon shivering away, shivering away. So this kind of nonsense that was going on for decades. So he was very modern to look at a woman's desires, for example, and he took it to another level with Devi, according to me. This is one of the very strong, one of my personal favorites in this entire package. All of his films are great favorites of mine, but this one is also very sophisticated because he made it after what is called the Oppu trilogy, which is the first 3 films he made about Appu and Durga and how they grow from childhood to adulthood and through marriage, etc. It's tracing a family's ups and downs and fortunes over much of a lifetime. But after that, when he made Devi, which is the goddess, he took it to another level. So he's talking of the relationship of a Rais zamindar, जिनका बेटा गांव में रहते हैं और उनका बेटा शहर को जाता है कॉलेज पढ़ने के लिए, लेकिन उन जमाने में शादी काफी जल्दी होती थी, when either child marriage or kind of teenagers. So his son is married when they are teenagers, जो 14-15 साल की शादी, उनका बेटा जब इस उम्र के है और उसकी बीवी और भी जवान है. तो this is played by the exquisite Sharmila Tagore.
Yeah.
And Soumitra Chatterjee playing a husband. Now the thing is, वो बेटा गांव को माने शहर को निकल गया है. And this is a very interesting story where the father-in-law, he dreams that his daughter-in-law is a goddess, becomes a goddess. तो एक सपने के वास्ते he actually makes his daughter-in-law a goddess. तो वो उनका माने मंदिर बनाता है घर में, उनकी आरती उतारता है, पूजा करता है, पूरा गांव आता है. Then one day गलती से by accident she cures, पूजा करने के बाद एक माने बीमार बच्चा ठीक हो जाता है, तो finish माने miracle worker, तो पूरी गांव then makes a big cue कि वो देवी खुद है, etc. etc. So in a very interesting way, he, it's also talking, so it's talking of, we don't actually see him sexually exploiting his daughter-in-law, but there is definitely a psychological, very complex, it's not the Oedipus complex, but a variation of that, where you see very interesting the relation between a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and how psychologically he's definitely violating her. To me, this is a very modern story, because today when we have the Me Too movement, it's a whole other thing where we see that the abuse of women can be many different things other than an actual rape. Well, yep. Rape is, of course, a horrific kind of the worst assault, but there are many things from birth to death that we experience in different ways, being abused by men psychologically, physically, emotionally, financially, in 2,000 different ways, right? Women know very different kinds of abuse, very different kinds of exploitation, and they always have the words to say it. They don't always have a way of addressing it, right? We know that today. So for me, he's very relevant in the Me Too age, because for me, this is very much a Me Too kind of exploitation. But in those days, they didn't have the words for it, right? So he's very psychological. It's not that he made only simple things. He made very psychologically complex films, but it's very easy to understand what's going on there. Even if you haven't read psychology, you know exactly what's going on. And you see the abuse that's taking place. And you also see, because he was Brahmo, you also see the value of education. So जब बीच में उनका बेटा वापस आ जाता है, because there is a sister-in-law who writes, all this, बहुत bizarre कुछ क्या-क्या चल रहा है अपने घर में, आप तुरंत आ जाइए. So when the husband comes, he's shocked, like, what the hell, मेरी बीवी देवी बन गई, क्या बकवास हो रहा है. तो वो उनको साइड को लेके, हम भाग जाए, मेरा पिताजी तो पागल ही हो गया है, आपको क्या बनाया है, what is this nonsense going on. So you also see how rationalism, education brings rationalism, right? Whereas जो आप इतने पढ़े नहीं लिखे हो, पढ़े लिखे नहीं हो, तो you might be more vulnerable to this religious mumbo jumbo shit, right? So to me, it's a very daring exploration of how the combination of patriarchy and faith, which is religion, can be explosive and dangerous, which is what I see exactly going on in India today. It's a very explosive, dangerous combination of patriarchy and religion and faith and reason. There is no reason at all. And I find that the country is in a very, very dangerous position now, where we're talking of purity of Hindus, etc., etc. And that is a very easy solution for self-destruction. We think that, Hindu Raj and, Muslims and Sikhs and Christians and all minorities, all kachra, and get rid of them and send them to Pakistan, etc., etc. But in fact, we are making sure that India is going to be destroyed in a very short time. We are sitting on a bomb and we're saying, हम दूसरों को, नष्ट कर रहे हैं, जो खुद ऐसे, how you make ash of yourself, जो शिव जी ना.
Yeah.
So the Brahmastra can also be very dangerous when it's in the wrong hands. So we don't realize we are actually destroying India very fast. So Ray was very ahead of his time in seeing this, in seeing that education and rationalism and logic can be a very powerful way of modernizing your society, जो देवी में बहुत ही strong तरीके से बोला है, the debate of faith versus reason, right? जो later also in a very beautiful another film, The Enemy of the People, or also Ghore Baire, The Home and the World, keeps bringing up these subjects of modernity time and again. Yeah.
एंड मीनाक्षी, आप खुद भी फिल्म क्रिटिक हैं और आपने आई एम श्योर बहुत सारी फिल्में देखी होंगी, तो आई कांट लेट यू गो विदाउट टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस प्रेजेंट इशू, जो एक डिवाइड चल रहा है, बॉलीवुड की फिल्में एंड साउथ इंडियन फिल्म्स आर डूइंग रियली वेल ऑन बॉक्स ऑफिस। तो आपको क्या लगता है कि क्या रीजन है कि हिंदी फिल्में जो हैं वो बॉक्स ऑफिस पे परफॉर्म उस तरीके से नहीं कर पा रही है? इज इट बिकॉज कि बहुत रिजिड हो गए हैं फिल्म मेकर्स, या फिर ऑडियंस जो है उन्होंने अपने आप को रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर लिया है?
Thank you for a superb question. So I think Bollywood has always had a kind of arrogance कि oh man, हमको सब कुछ पता है और हम ही राज करेंगे, और वो सब अंडू गुंडू मद्रासी लोग, उनको कुछ पता नहीं. So we always had everything in the rest of India, including South India, in utter contempt. If you ask Bollywood films के 2 directors कि आप 2 brilliant मलयालम फिल्ममेकर के नाम बताओ या 2 brilliant Tamil filmmakers के फिल्म बताओ, उनको कुछ पता है. हाँ, वो अंडू गुंडू, वो मद्रासी लोग, man, there was a real contempt about it, and they had no idea, because they were ignorant. They had no idea the richness and extremely evolved, जैसे हाँ और Satyajit Ray, हाँ कुछ बंगाली बाबू type, right? Actually Satyajit Ray is famous all over the world, but they think Bollywood is the be all and end all, Bollywood. तो उनको कुछ पता ही नहीं कि आजू बाजू में क्या लोग क्या बना रहे हैं, और वर्ल्ड सिनेमा में जा रहे हैं. So Malayalam, Tamil, Marathi, all of these cinemas, Bengali, they have been part of world cinema for half a century, for nearly a century. लेकिन Bollywood को लगता है हाँ बस हमारा ही राज चलेगा. So out of ignorance came this big shock. Oh my God, Bahubali, when it came, it totally slammed their faces. They didn't know what hit them. And it's very interesting that, you know, Dharma Productions, etc., they now want to be part of the South Indian industry. Hame bhi le lo, hame bhi Hindi rights de do. So they are understanding that if you can't beat them, join them. So now also the reverse is happening. So Bollywood wants to be part of the Southern industry, and South India wants to be part of Bollywood. So now there's a much more, you know, like not only in Bahubali, but also in RRR, you see that much more with, you know, the big stars of Bollywood, like Alia Bhatt, etc., getting a 2-bit role. Some Sita, mane 2 minute aapne dekha na, it's like almost a blink and a miss role, but she was willing to take it because she could see that this film is going to be really something big, and she would like to be a part of that, even if it's a very small role. And she still made herself memorable. Even Ajay Devgan, these, you know, the big stars of Bollywood, they're taking bit roles in a South Indian Andugundu film, right? Because they thought it's Andugundu, and they had no idea that it's going to wipe out. You know, it's going to really go so far ahead, and it's reinventing what used to be called like पुराने ज़माने में pan India film, all India film जो बोलते थे. अच्छा, at one time, अरे सलमान है तो okay, it's an all India film. या शाहरुख खान है तो all India film, right? But now South India is coming forward, and I think there are 2-3 reasons for it. One is unke stars काफी बड़े हैं, not in all India, but in the South they're very big. The Southern industry is very huge. So if you combine, say example, if you just take Andugundu, like if you just take South Indian cinema, what was known in Bollywood as Andugundu, there's actually very rich individual cinemas by themselves, very powerful, and often, for example, the Tamil cinema would make more films than Bollywood year on year. हर साल वो Bollywood से भी जास्ती फिल्म बनाते थे. Meaning, look at the industry so strong, लेकिन हमें कुछ पता भी नहीं था. So there is of course Tamil industry, Malayalam industry, Kannada industry, Telugu industry. Though these 4, if you just take these 4, they are about 60 to 70% of India's all India market. Meaning Bollywood is in a minority. हमें उनको कुछ पता नहीं. वो सोच रहे अच्छा हम राज करें, but actually Bollywood is in a minority. If you look at just the volume of production, but also even Bombay में, मैं Bombay में रहती हूँ. Even if you just look on Book My Show, which is a online booking site for booking film tickets, right? For example. So even if you look there, the number of films, if you look at the total number of films released in any week, 1 week, Bollywood is in an absolute minority. And there's a whole lot of other films in other languages which are much more than the Bollywood numbers, right? So they're very good with visual effects. They're very good with original storytelling. The kind of Bahubali kind of story idea will not occur to a Bollywood wala. Right? Also, I find they're very strong in their mythology and epics, which comes in different ways in the storytelling, but also visually as symbols, etc. You know, like this one image I will never forget in Bahubali is one image of just a hand holding a small newborn baby above the water. I don't know if you remember, it was on the poster. Of course, he had this Tagda Prabhas with, okay, you know, his muscles and holding up on shivling and, you know, all that high drama, the macho stuff is there, but also this very vulnerable, ek haath jo hai, पानी के ऊपर बाढ़ के ऊपर, it is a newborn baby, छोटा सा बच्चा पानी के ऊपर it's holding, right? So this is for me also some kind of biblical things, or you know, in the era of Krishna, etc. All these बाढ़ में, all these miracles, and you know, nature was such a big part of that. So they are much more closer to our roots, to our original myths and epics and storytelling. और ये अलग-अलग तरीके के से हमारे modern storytelling में भी आता है. उनके roots बहुत deep हैं, गहरे हैं. लेकिन Bollywood is a kind of la la la, ha. Okay, hero meets one heroine, meets a heroine. Suddenly, वो स्विट्जरलैंड में गाना गा रहे हैं. Suddenly, यहाँ villain पे damn, boom. दो bikes, बहुत action हो रहा है. माने कुछ भी, it's a kind of surface cinema जो actually roots नहीं है, but ऐसे ही कोई माने AC रूम में बैठ के लैपटॉप पे या गपशप करके ऐसे स्टोरी बना रहे हैं. But there are no roots to it. There is a lot of talent. लेकिन Bollywood में हमेशा this talent is not able to surface. This is why I feel South Indian cinema succeeding so much. But I've also curated, for example, we had shown Bahubali 2. I had curated something for the British Film Institute a few years ago. We had shown Bahubali 2. And, you know, there was a Q&A after jo ye sab, Rajmouli or, you know, the cast and crew had come. And they had been that live on Facebook. And the British Film Institute was shocked. They had so many thousands and millions of entries. They said, ये लोग कहाँ थे इतने सालों, हमने कभी लंदन में नहीं देखा है. This film has got so many hits जो हमारी पूरी ऐसे बाकी के programs, Western program, British program में कभी नहीं आया. तो ये लोग छुपे कहाँ थे, हमें कुछ पता नहीं. बाहुबली बताने के बाद हमें पता लगा कि इतने fans हैं लंदन में या that are interested in this cinema. So it's a real eye opener. But they've also shown it here, I think RRR in Toronto, etc. Yeah. So it has been a real eye opener. People are shocked. Oh my God, so many people have come to see it. So it is really cutting across. It's not only a pan India, it is cutting across Toronto audiences. So in the West, in many countries in the world. So it has a universal language of storytelling, right? Which is very different and distinctive from Bollywood. So I think it's very, very good this is happening, because for the first time these two big industries are coming together and trying to make a genuinely pan Indian cinema that hopefully works. Hopefully it's a win-win for everybody. Yeah.
So just last two questions left, Meenakshi.
Yeah.
So I think you very well, you know, described this scenario between Bollywood and South Indian films, and of course they are doing really great at the box office. अच्छा, मेरा आपसे, जैसे कि मैंने कहा, दो लास्ट के questions बचे हैं, तो मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहती हूँ कि जैसे कि आप बता रहे थे कि सत्यजीत रे की फिल्में जो थी, they were ahead of you know the time, और उस टाइम पे उन्होंने ये फिल्में बनाई, and आज के डेट में हमें काफी रिस्ट्रिक्शन मिलता है. एज अ फिल्म मेकर आप लिबरेटेड फील नहीं करते इंडिया में, क्योंकि यूर ऑलवेज स्कैर्ड कि क्या पता आपकी फिल्म रिलीज ही ना करने दी जाए, या रिलीज से पहले ही बहुत सारे यू नो ऑब्स्टिकल्स एज अ फिल्म मेकर आपको डील करने पड़ेंगे. रिलीज के बाद तो एक अलग सिनेरियो होता है, चलेगी फिल्म या नहीं चलेगी, लेकिन उससे पहले एक अलग बैटल शुरू हो जाता है. तो मुझे आपसे ये पूछना है कि आप फिल्म क्रिटिक हैं, तो अगर हमारा सिनेमा लिबरेटेड नहीं है तो हम कह सकते हैं कि हमारी कंट्री डेवलप हुई है?
Oh my goodness, this is a full googly. I think development of a country is very different from censorship. And there is no question that censorship definitely holds back a country in many different ways. हम सोचते हैं कि हाँ अच्छा हम पूरे कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं और सिर्फ हमारी मैसेज जाएंगी और सिर्फ हिंदू के बारे, प्योर हिंदू एंड हिंदू राइट. बट एक्चुअली हम भूल रहे हैं कि इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन इज 2500 years old. और जितने भी ब्रेन वॉश करेंगे 5 साल में या 10 साल में या 8 साल में, वो सिर्फ 4 साल और 8 साल की बात है ना. तो हमारी संस्कार 2500 साल पुरानी है और वो इतनी जल्दी टुकड़े टुकड़े नहीं जाएगी, ये मेरी आशा है और मेरी काइंड ऑफ फेथ है कि हम हमारे रूट्स और कल्चर इतनी जल्दी नहीं भूलेंगे. But for the time being, it is of course a very dangerous situation. But you're absolutely right, क्योंकि filmmaking is such a costly business. इतना पैसा invest किया जाता है कि recover करने बहुत is getting more and more dangerous, and therefore there's a lot of self-censorship. क्योंकि censor board is full of right-wing people anyway, and now the laws have changed. So even if your film is cleared by the censors, कोई भी फलाना डिमका guy can say, oh no, I object to this film because my sentiment is hurt. So this incredible new department of hurt sentiment, new ministry of hurt sentiment is the ultimate blackmailing of Indian cinema, and is certainly being legitimized by the entire machinery that makes it possible कि कोई भी फलाना डिमका इंसान यूपी में कोई भी गांव वाला कोई भी एक केस डाल सकता है, एक एफआईआर लगाएगा, बस एक पर्ची लगाएगा पुलिस थाने में, बस आपकी 200 करोड़ की फिल्म ऐसे ही बैठेगी जब तक आप इसको 100 करोड़ न दे या पेटी मत भेजो. So it's a very, very mafia thing that's coming in, and censorship is very much part of that. So you don't want to upset somebody, तो आप ये नहीं बोलेंगे, वो नहीं बोलेंगे. So I think we are becoming very censorship is forcing people to become very small and petty, and for survival instincts कि बस हमने किसी और का माने लोन लेके या प्रोड्यूसर के पैसे डुबाना नहीं चाहेंगे तो एटलीस्ट उनको रिकवर करना है, तो ये लाइन क्यों नहीं निकालें या ये सिचुएशन क्यों नहीं डालें. But Ray is actually telling us how forward he was. When you're talking of something of a father-in-law having a relationship with his daughter-in-law, which is 100% exploitative, even though it is more psychological than physical, to me it is no less exploitative or abuse. It is no less an abuse. If a man abuses a woman for 10 years, for example, psychologically, it is no less abuse than if he had raped her. I mean, to me, abuse is abuse. It can take different forms. It can be financial, economic, psychological, physical. Abuse is 100 forms. Exploitation has 100 forms. But he talked about that in 1950s and 1960s. और इस ज़माने में 2022 में डर रहे हैं, कांप रहे हैं, और उन्होंने क्या बताया, माने आधा century ago, right? So actually, with each film, he reminds us he had the same risks. वो भी लाला से पैसे ले रहा था, वो भी मारवाड़ी से पैसे लेके बना रहा था, तो उनकी भी रिस्क थी. हर एक फिल्म में whenever he talks about this, वो भी वही रिस्क ले रहे थे. वो कम रिस्क नहीं ले रहे हैं जो अभी के डायरेक्टर्स नहीं ले रहे हैं. It is the same risk, maybe even more. उनको ऐसी बातों की करने की जरूरत नहीं थी उनकी फिल्म में, फिर भी कई है. और इतनी sophisticated, इतनी classiness से जो आप you just want to weep at the end of the film. So also more sophisticated. उनके कोई villains नहीं है. रे के फिल्म्स में generally, राय के फिल्म, he doesn't like, he said very interesting in an interview, he said, I find villains very boring. कोई black and white कि ये this is a good guy hero and वो villain है, वो बहुत बुरा आदमी है. That's like really boring, because most of humans have both points mixed in us, right? So the good guys also have something bad guys also have some good quality. So he's able to see the humanity in it, right? So although the father-in-law is exploiting, you also see where he's coming from. Right? So that's the sophistication of Ray, which I think is very much makes him a man of today. है ना, आज भी बहुत ही relevant है.
बहुत ही relevant है. And मीनाक्षी जी, आखिरी सवाल मेरा आपसे ये होगा कि टोरंटो में internationally कहीं पर भी जो फिल्म्स को पसंद करते हैं, why should they watch Satyajit Ray's films? अगर आपसे मैं पूछूं तो.
So first, I think for his values, which are very modern, he was humanist, he was feminist. He was very ahead of his time. So he's very much a man of today. When I give you the example of Devi, which is patriarchy and faith versus reason debate, which is again very, very, very relevant today. So he was very ahead of his time. He's very much talking to today's young generation. One of the films that we include is called Aparajito, which is The Undefeated, which is by Onik Datta, on how Ray made his first film. So I think almost every youngster today, it may be a computer engineer or an architect or whatever, they dream, हाँ एक दिन हम हमारी फिल्म बनाएंगे, माने सपना है, however realistic or not, but one day we dream of making our own films. So Satyajit Ray actually made, वो advertising में थे, like a lot of people in advertising, हाँ एक दिन हम बनाएंगे, उनका एक सब सपना है, but उन्होंने सपना पूरा किया, right? So it's also, so it's very much made for today's younger generation as well as the older generation to appreciate the riches we have, but it's very accessible and it talks to a younger generation because of these values and also his aesthetics, very, very classy. जो इतनी छोटी कम budget पे, I think this is why he's very relevant also. इतनी कम budget पे आप इतनी classy film बना सकते हो जो 60-70 साल के बाद whole world is still celebrating. माने इतनी low budget में, so budget is not a connection to how classy your films are or उनकी क्या history होगी. वो आप बनाते time नहीं बोल सकते हो, but you can make cinema for that will last way after you have passed away. Your legacy is still celebrated. So it's not a question of budget. They आपके दिल से जो कहानी बोलेंगे, जो करेंगे, which is daring and sophisticated. So he's a fantastic shining example of that. Therefore, very inspiring to the younger generation.
For sure. मीनाक्षी जी, thank you so much वाई मीडिया
बहुत
पे
शुक्रिया।
हमें ज्वाइन करने के लिए, एंड थैंक यू फॉर द वर्क दैट यू डूइंग, क्योंकि बहुत
थैंक
सारे
यू।
लोग जिन्होंने इन फिल्मों को नहीं देखा होगा, अब टिफ के थ्रू वो ये फिल्में देख पाएंगे। एंड सारे व्यूअर्स को भी मैं बताना चाहूंगी, अगस्त 4 से ये स्क्रीनिंग शुरू हो चुकी है एंड अगस्त 27 तक रहने वाली है। तो अगर आप इंटरेस्टेड हैं और अपने माइंड को और थिंकिंग को, मैं तो कहूंगी, अगर और डेवलप करना चाहते हैं, तो ये फिल्में आपको जरूर देखनी चाहिए। एंड वाई मीडिया ग्रुप की तरफ से थैंक यू मीनाक्षी जी अगेन फॉर
Thank
ज्वाइनिंग।
you very much. बहुत बहुत नमस्ते। शुक्रिया आपकी। Thank you. Hi, I'm Meenakshi Shedde and you're watching Channel Y.
You are watching Channel Y. Channel Y, a South Asian Canadian channel.